Have you ever wondered what this is? Have you ever wondered what this is? Have you ever wondered what this is? Well, they're spread out around Perth's inner suburbs, but they're part of the same story. In fact, quite a few locations on my master list have been ticked off for this video. I would have never guessed they're related. I haven't traversed the metro like this for filming since my original Perth trams video. These locations were tied together by a company originally called H.L Brisbane and Co. This later merged to become Brisbane and Wunderlich, eventually being renamed again as Bristile. They manufactured many products, but were most known for bricks and tiles. These locations found on major roads are the remains of open-air display parks, mostly built in the 1930s. It was a marketing strategy to showcase their wares, enticing families to visit by essentially building playgrounds. They were always on oddly shaped and small plots of land that weren't really suitable for anything else, but always near developing neighbourhoods. Considering the sheer amount of home building Perth has experienced in the outer suburbs over the last 10 years, it's interesting to see how building products were physically advertised back in the day. We have H.L Lancelot Brisbane to thank for this video, who went by Lance. Later, his name would earn a Sir at the front. He was a businessman and industrialist who was notable throughout Perth in the first half of the 20th century. As a young man in 1911, he joined a company called Wunderlich as a designer. Wunderlich was established over east and mostly manufactured pressed metal ceiling panels. Brisbane would eventually be shipped out for World War I, transferring to Sydney in 1924 after he returned. He would then return to Perth in 1926, but this time as an executive. In 1929, he resigned from Wunderlich, floating a new company called H.L Brisbane and Co Limited with his brother David. Their first move was to buy an existing terracotta roofing tile factory in Ascot called West Australian Potteries. That was originally known as Piercy and Pittman when it was established as a pottery works in 1910. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the site, found on Grandstand Road just before it changes to Garrett Road and travels over the Swan River. The site would have looked very different in the 1930s however, with there only being 2 coal and wood-fired kilns. In the early 1930s, a Claremont residential lot on Stirling Highway was leased by the company, not far from the Brisbane family home. This was to be Perth's first landscaped outdoor display. It was named Bristile Park after a roofing tile range the company manufactured. Newspaper adverts showcase it like a destination to not be missed. While some sources state it included a big water wheel, I found quarter-page adverts specifically promoting a competition for architectural students in 1935. The competition was to build small but to scale houses, which of course used the company's products. These include distinctive styles such as Tudor, Georgian, Colonial and Spanish. They even included their own gardens, lawn and a picket fence. While designed for children, the advert stresses that adults could also enter these houses without much effort. We wouldn't want the breadwinners missing out on some nice brick and tile work, would we? At the conclusion of the promotion, the structures would be donated to charity. I wonder if any have survived. Bristile Park certainly doesn't, and probably hasn't for a very long time. I know it was on the corner of Lock Street and Stirling Highway, but I'm not entirely sure which side. My guess is the western side, which retro map shows as fruit trees and vines in 1934. The eastern side was likely a tennis club. It was also vacant land again by 1953, with no large water wheels or small houses to be seen. If you would like to see a tiny house, make your way down to Hardy Park in Belmont next to Great Eastern Highway. This is the approximate location of a display park from 1937. In those days, there was a small spit of land called Devil's Elbow. It was basically the remainder of land from the old road being realigned, with a portion of the original left as residential street. I saw the road named differently 3 times in my research, being referred to as the Old Belmont Road, Ascot Road, and, most confusingly, Guildford Road. It did appear to be called Great Eastern Highway by 1938, however. Devil's Elbow had been turned into a park a year prior, but the company initially leased it from the road board for 6 months, continuously renewing in the following decades. The stipulation of the lease was to maintain the land, which the company did at its own cost. What is now known as the Dollhouse was the centerpiece of the display. That was surrounded by a landscape garden, which included a pond, pergola, brick paths, rockeries, and of course, plenty of product displays. It's not known who designed the Dollhouse, but it doesn't appear to be any of the competition entries from Bristile Park. Instead, it was built in the interwar style, including a variety of design features and brick types to advertise what the company sold. Jumping forward to 1997, the company still leased the land, but most of the display pieces were removed between 1989 and 1995. By then, only the Dollhouse remained and looked quite derelict by 2001, surrounded by cyclone fencing. By this point, that section of highway was earmarked for road widening. The Dollhouse disappears early 2003, but reappears at the end of the year in Hardy Park, about 50 metres away. It had been dismantled and rebuilt by a company called All Brick Restorations. Despite more road widening in 2012, the Dollhouse remains in the same position. These days it's protected by a metal fence with brick pillars. I do wonder if the pillars were built using bricks from the old displays. By 1938, H.L Brisbane and Co merged with Wunderlich's Western Australian operations, Lance's former employer. It became the state's largest tile producer at this point, but also extended the company's portfolio to include metalwork, mostly for shop fronts and internal fittings. It was around this time that a display park was built in Bassendean. All that's left now is this unassuming wishing well, which I've passed by many times and never given a second look. Its location on a quiet residential street might seem a bit odd now, but major traffic once passed by this open-air showroom. If you've ever wondered why the street is so wide, it's because this is the original alignment of Guildford Road. It whizzed past the Oval, up the current-day Old Perth Road for the Basso town site, before making a hard left at the train station towards the city. In the mid-1970s, it was realigned to its current state from the Swan River and along the train line. No doubt a much more comfortable drive. It did mean the display village was no longer in a prime location traffic-wise, however, unless of course there was a Swans game on. It looks like the displays disappeared soon after. There also appeared to be some sort of tiny house, but that also disappeared in the mid to late 80s. There's not much information out there otherwise. Not even the Heritage Council knows exactly when it was constructed. What we do know is that Lance's father, H.L Brisbane, was a well-known local for the time. He was a member of the West Guildford Road Board from 1921 to 1922 and the Bassendean Road Board several times throughout the 20s and 30s. He was also notable in the local Horticultural Society and Methodist Church. The reserve the display centre sat on was created in 1939, but Inherit points out that this could have been created earlier in 1937 when Hugh Sr. died. Still, the wishing well has survived even if it is filled in, although someone is using it to store their woodstock packaging. Now let's hop on the bike and pedal ourselves down to Victoria Park. Here we will find the most complete outdoor showroom remaining, minus the brick and tile displays. It includes a miniature windmill and another wishing well. The park is a bit hidden from Shepparton Road these days, so it's not quite the prominent entry point into Vic Park that it once was. It is still obvious if you're driving along Albany Highway towards the city, however. Like in Belmont, the display park was located on an odd piece of land, this time triangle-shaped, which is formed by the intersections of Ascot Street, Albany Highway and Shepparton Road. The windmill was designed by a prominent architect of the time named Marshall Clifton. He sprung up before on this channel, being partially responsible for designing the Big Bell Hotel. The land was leased from the Perth Council in 1939, with the windmill and display park supposedly being built by 1940. It was constructed by Ernie Banks, who was originally contracted by the company to build kilns, but eventually became a permanent employee. It's thought that he may have built the other display centres too, and like before, these were constructed by products the company sold. Having said all that, to throw a wrench in the information works, I found this newspaper advert from 1936. It's again for Bristile Park, which we talked about before, but this time advertised the Bristile Mill. This predates the supposed construction date by 3 or 4 years, but looks exactly the same. You can't help but wonder if it's the same windmill. This time, the advert encourages families to visit at night since the windmill is illuminated with floodlights. It otherwise describes it as a charming and well worth a visit, surrounded by green lawns and gay flowers. There was also a sculpture of a lion in Vic Park that was reportedly quite the landmark. It might have been moved from a Netherlands park I'm yet to mention, but according to a website called Historic Victoria Park, the lion predates all the display centres. They claim a plaster modeller from Fremantle named Walter Burville constructed the lion prior to World War I. Sadly, it suffered badly from vandals in Vic Park. At the very least, they would usually leave a bottle of beer between its paws. Otherwise, the mill's blades were replaced in 1989 after deteriorating over the years. The rest of the structures were also in a pretty bad state during the 90s, but luckily, funding was received for restoration in the late 90s and early 2000s. By the 1940s, Brisbane and Wunderlich was one of the state's largest firms. During World War II, they contributed to the war effort by manufacturing ammunition boxes and pontoon bridging equipment, among other things. They also supplied assay crucibles and refractories for the mining industry. They also further expanded at this time into pottery by acquiring a Subiaco factory. This was originally known as the Calyx Porcelain Company, founded by Christian Frederick Moritzen in 1921. After going into debt, it was eventually run by the state to encourage the local manufacturing of China, with the government leasing it out from 1931. Brisbane and Wunderlich took over the lease in 1941, followed by an outright purchase in 1945. During this time, they manufactured crockery for the army. The factory was also known for a famous line of crockery called Wembley Ware. Large-scale sculptures of this line could be viewed at another company display park in Netherlands called the Land of Make-Believe. This opened in 1954, but I don't have much information. I know it was similar to previous display parks, but with an emphasis on fairy tales. I also suspect that the given address is wrong. Most sources list the corner of Hampton Road and Stirling Highway, but I instead believe it to be on the intersection of Clifton Road, 1 block west. My usual go-tos for photographic proof failed me, those being historical aerial photography from Landgate and other photos and plans from the State Archives. This Landgate capture from 1965 is fairly clear, however. On the east side of Hampton Road there are these buildings. These still exist today, I think they're student accommodation. On the west side, we have open grassland and no obvious structures. It's when you travel further west to Clifton Street that you can see something. It's not clear of all the tree cover, however. The other photo I found was taken from an aeroplane in 1956. This predates the student accommodation on Hampton Street, but nothing is obvious in the parkland. Moving west, we can see the grassed area, and again, once you hit Clifton Street, there is something in the scrub. There's not enough detail to ascertain what exactly, but there's definitely nothing on the corner of Hampton Street and the highway. I did find these photos on the Lost Perth Facebook page, however. As far as I can tell, these are the only photos of the park on the internet or anywhere else. I will link it below, although I'm sure many of you already follow the page. Regardless, the park was demolished in 1966 for the Secondary Teachers College, which is now part of UWA. The company continued to grow post-war. For one, they were the major supplier of sewage pipes for decades. Have a think about that the next time you have a bathroom break in the inner suburbs. They also played a pivotal role in home building post-war, being a prominent supplier of tiles. They also began to deal in glass, acquiring a company called the Perth Lead Light and Glazing Company in 1951. If that wasn't broad enough, they also acquired a plastics company called Lusterlight in the late 1950s. In 1978, Brisbane and Wunderlich merged with a company called Whittaker's to form Bristile Limited. And no, that wasn't the chocolate brand. The company changed its name to Bristile because they wanted to shorten and simplify it. Bristile already had the name recognition because of their tile roofing line, so it checked the box. The era of open-air display parks wasn't quite over, however. They still had one more in them. I'm sure plenty of you have seen this miniature castle and dog swamp found in the suburb of Yokine. It's all that remains of the Sir Lance Brisbane land of make-believe. Bristile reused the park name from Netherlands, but incorporated their founder's name. He had passed away in 1966 at the age of 73. The park was built around 1980. I do believe it was the final display village of this type constructed, but I'd love to hear otherwise. It included the obligatory tiny houses next to displays of roof tiles. Also included was a themed toilet block with Humpty Dumpty, a sandpit, and a large boot based around the old woman who lived in a shoe. That is thought to have come from Netherlands. This part of the park was connected to Wanneroo Road by a bridge over a lake. This is where the castle is more or less acting like an entry point and eye grabber from the road. This was of course also surrounded by more tile displays. The lion sculpture was also restored and moved here. I wonder if it still exists if it's supposedly so old, or anything you can see here really. The park appeared to remain intact until at least 1985, but by 1989, that section of Wanneroo Road was upgraded. While the castle wasn't in the way, all the roadside tile displays disappeared. It looks like the ones on the other side of the lake were removed too, although the fairytale themed structures did remain. A lot of those did disappear by 1995, however, the next available Landgate capture. A Flickr photo album from 2009 shows there were more remains than today as well. This is from an account called Purple Worm. I followed this account quite closely during my teenage never leave my bedroom stage, and it helped a lot in forming my base knowledge of locations. Other pivotal blogs during this time included The Worst of Perth and 6,000 Times. Purple Worm does still update their Flickr page, however, so I've linked it below. Anyway, that 2009 post shows that the themed toilet block, sandpit, bridge and castle still remained. But since then, the toilets and sandpit have been demolished. That bridge was still there when I visited in 2023, but it was closed for safety reasons and has since been replaced. These days, just the castle remains. It is intact, but could do with a clean. And I don't know if it's just me, but it kind of looks like it's leaning to the south a bit. Some grub ripped off one of the gates too, which is still attached to my 2023 visit. The interior is now used to store someone's mop, frying pan, potatoes, and a partially open tin of sardines, among other things. The sardines were particularly pungent. The Ascot family was used during this whole period, receiving extra kilns and other improvements over the decades. It would close in 1982, however. Bristile then sold the site to the state government in 1985. They would eventually demolish most of the sheds around the stacks and kilns in 1991. These days they are heritage listed, but they did sit there and deteriorate for many years. Thankfully, the site was restored in 2023. It's quite interesting to walk around and explore. There's even a statue of Sir Lance. Funnily enough, the builder of this sculpture is a mystery and wasn't commissioned by the government. They have decided to retain it after community support, however. The then Director General of the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, Gow McGowan, told 6PR in 2021 that they plan to move it into storage until they figured out who the artist was. There's also quite a lot of vacant land here. There doesn't appear to be a set plan in place for what's next, but I'd imagine the upmarket housing subdivision next door will eventually jump across the road. Speaking of upmarket housing estates, there are remains of the pottery works in Subiaco you can visit too. The factory closed in 2006, by then known as Australian Fine China. It had run continuously since the 1920s. There were plans to move to Armidale in 2004 as redevelopment surrounded the site, but this never happened. Instead, it closed for good. Most of the site was demolished in 2010, with a few structures remaining that are visible on Street View. One of those partially survived the construction of the subdivision in 2011, and that's known as the Calyx building. This has been incorporated into the surrounding apartment blocks and includes information plaques and historic photos. There's also a range of equipment from the factory scattered around, mostly near the apartment's foyers. If you head down to Wembley Court, near the Lord's Recreation Centre, you might spot these old kilns in a vacant lot. These are also from the pottery works and will eventually be used in a display, potentially near the intersection of Price Street and Rosello Lane. It's a tunnel kiln that's been chopped up, with sections missing. There will be an interpretive display at its original length, with true to scale gaps between the remains. There were 2 tunnel kilns originally, with this being the first. It used overhead oil firing, which was a world first for the time. So be wary of kiln nerds descending on Subiaco once it gets installed. You can still buy Australian Fine China, which appears to now be geared towards the hospitality market, although ironically, it's now manufactured in China itself. And as for Bristile, well, murders and executions continue and is now part of a company called Brickworks, although it does still produce roofing tiles. There is a display centre in Osborne Park, but it doesn't appear to include any fairytale themed structures, wishing wells, or tiny houses. That's a shame. If you'd like to support the channel, I offer bonus behind the scenes videos. In the most recent, I vlogged a partial filming trip around the Pembleton, Northcliffe and Quinninup area. This was mostly to film an abandoned railway between Pembleton and Northcliffe, which will be a future video. I also visited Meckering on a separate trip using my new whiz-bang Subaru Forester car camping setup. I vlogged the trip, where we also camped in a ghost town. This, along with a vlog that involves the construction process and camping amongst other abandoned history, can be viewed for a membership subscription. Other videos include 2 longer filming trip vlogs. One was based around Kew, while another was in the surrounds of Kalgoorlie. I've also released a behind the scenes vlog on how I made the Clays Brook video, several vlogs where I take you along on reconnaissance missions, and a travel guide to Melbourne. In that, I take you to several Victorian locations that you might find interesting. The support program is just $3 a month and can be cancelled at any time. That $3 includes the extra content, shows your username at the end of the videos, and highlights any comments you might make. All money earned goes back into the production of future videos. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.